Greetings gamers, my name is Anto and today we're going to take a look at the differences and similarities between the Cleric in Pathfinder 2nd Edition and D&D 5e. This video is sponsored by Libris Nocturnum, a horror-themed adventure anthology now on Kickstarter. More on them later. I spent the last year learning Pathfinder 2nd Edition and diving into the differences between the two systems, and I find that making characters and comparing character classes directly one of the easiest ways for me to learn a new system. That's why I've already done videos like this on the Fighter and the Wizard, which you can see up there, but one of the most requested classes for me to do was the Cleric, which is what we're going to be doing today. So instead of making a character for each system, what we're going to do today is we're going to run through some of the class-specific stuff, some of their abilities and where they differ, particularly in where the mechanics of each system come into play with each class to make them play differently. So here we are on D&D Beyond. On the 5e Cleric, you can see that they get 1d8 hit dice per level. They get proficiency with light and medium armor, with shields, simple weapons, tools. They get saving throws in Wisdom and Charisma, and they get to choose 2 skills from History, Insight, Medicine, Persuasion, and Religion. When we compare that to the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Cleric, you can see that that Cleric starts with 8 hit points plus your Constitution modifier. So when you combine this with the hit points that you gain from your ancestry, just like all classes, the Cleric in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is going to start with more hit points than a Cleric in 5th Edition. Their key ability is Wisdom, which means they get a boost to their Wisdom score at first level. And then if we jump down to the initial proficiencies, you can see they're trained in Perception, trained in Fortitude, Reflex, and expert in will saves. Now, for those of you that are unaware, the way proficiency works in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a little bit different. So you have several different levels. You have Untrained, Trained, Expert, Master, Legendary. But the unique difference for Pathfinder 2nd Edition is when you are trained in something, when you are proficient in it, you also add your level. So at level 1, if you are trained in a Fortitude save, you would add +2 for being trained, and you would add +1 for being level 1. Same as being an expert in will, you're going to add +4 and the 1 from your level, so that's +5 to your will saving throw. This means that as you level up and gain new training, even if you don't necessarily invest too much more into trained skills, you're still going to get the rising bonus of your level, so you'll get better at everything kind of innately so long as you're trained in it. In terms of skills, the Cleric in Pathfinder 2nd Edition trained in Religion, then trained in 1 skill determined by the choice of deity, and then trained in a number of additional skills equal to 2 plus your intelligence modifier. That's pretty standard Pathfinder stuff. Skills in Pathfinder tend to be tied to intelligence. That's how it used to be in older editions of D&D as well, and it got changed for 5th edition. In terms of attacks, they're trained in simple weapons, trained in the favored weapon of their deity. If your deity's favorite weapon is uncommon, you also gain access to that weapon, and then trained in unarmed attacks. In terms of the uncommon part there of the deity's weapon, the rarity system in Pathfinder 2nd Edition works a little bit differently to 5e. So everything that is tagged as common is freely available to players. They can find it, they can buy it. There are no restrictions placed on them by the system to get anything that is common. So that might be spells, magic items, feats, skills, anything like that. But once you get into uncommon and rare, the system says you have to have Game Master approval to be able to do that. So where this says if your deity's favorite weapon is uncommon, you gain access to that as well. That's just to say you get access to that as if it were a common item. You don't have to worry about running it by your GM. They're untrained in all armor, though your doctrine might alter this, and then they're trained in unarmored defense, which means if they're not wearing armor, they get to add their level and their proficiency to their AC. Libris Nocturnum is a new horror anthology from Lunch Break Heroes. Now, you probably know Lunch Break Heroes either from the Deck of Many Quests or from their coverage of the Curse of Strahd module. Well, they're bringing their own series of horror modules to a brand new book via Kickstarter, and it is live right now. Libris Nocturnum is over 200 pages long and contains 13 adventures running from level 0 through to 12. Included in the book are 13 new settlements, which are towns and cities to explore, which are unique to the adventures. There's over 30 new creatures and NPC stat blocks to help build out your world and flesh out these adventures. Each adventure in the module tackles a different horror genre, from gothic horror to body horror, cosmic horror, and even more. And the entire book is filled with beautiful looking artwork. You can find the link below to go and back Libris Nocturnum, and thanks again to Lunch Break Heroes for supporting the channel. And that brings us to the biggest difference between these two classes, between Pathfinder 2nd Edition and 5th Edition, and that is the way that spellcasting works. And we talked about this in the Wizard video, because Wizards in Pathfinder 2nd Edition are prepared casters as well. prepared casting in PF2 works really differently to how it works in 5th edition. In 5th edition, you have a number of spell slots, you know a number of spells, and you can use your spell slots to cast any of those known spells. You can prepare them per day and cast them much more freely than you can in PF2. In PF2, you have a number of spell slots, a number of known spells, and each day you have to specifically fill each slot with a prepared spell. So if we look at the cleric spell table here, and let's say we've got a 5th level cleric. So a 5th level cleric in PF2 has 2 3rd level spell slots. And the way this works is at the start of each day, you will choose what 2 specific 3rd level spells you want to put in those slots. That does mean you're a little bit less flexible in your casting. You do have to make that choice ahead of time as to what spells you think you're going to get access to or going to be able to use most effectively that day. It does require a little bit more planning, but there are various feats and items and consumables that will allow you more flexibility and the ability to use spells outside of those that you've prepared throughout the course of your adventuring day. The other big noticeable difference between spell castings in the system is in Pathfinder 2nd edition, there is a noticeable aura when you cast a spell. Whenever you cast a spell, you create this kind of runic emanation that is visible and means that anytime you're going to cast a spell, anyone around you will always notice it. But you can get feats that make this less visible or invisible or make it so that you can cast the spell silently. It's just baked into the mechanics that casting a spell is always an obvious action. Now, this isn't the case in 5e, so you get a lot of instances where players are like, oh, can I try and, cast a spell under the table or whisper under my breath to cast a spell? It just makes it so that anytime a player casts a spell in PF2, everyone is aware that a spell is being cast. It makes it easier to put things into initiative. If you're in a discussion and a player goes, right, I'm going to cast a spell, everyone will see that. It would be initiative. You don't get that awkward moment of, oh, well, do they notice that you're casting a spell? So taking a look at the spell table for the clerics in the 2 systems, things are a little bit different. You can see that the 5e version gets up to 9th level spells. The PF2 version gets up to 10th level spells. 10th level spells are a thing in PF2, and it is separated out some of that 9th level spell casting bracket so that people don't get to 9th level and just go, well, I'm going to take Wish, because why would I take anything other than Wish? Wish has been moved up to 10th level spell, which means that you get more kind of variety in your very high level casting. And then you can see that the Pathfinder 2nd edition cleric gets a few fewer slots overall, depending on their level, than the 5e version of the cleric, but they do get a lot more cantrip slots. They get 5 at 1st level versus the 3 that the 5e version gets. And if we look here at the cleric table, you can see there's a little asterisk on the cantrips, and down here it'll say your divine font gives you an additional heal or harm spells of this level. The number is always equal to 1 plus your charisma modifier. So clerics don't have to use up their spell slots to consume healing spells. They get a number of dedicated healing spells each day. This is really useful to be able to add a battlefield healer to your party without having to dedicate the cleric to being a party healer. This is another area where the 5e and PF2 clerics diverge, because the 5e cleric gets the channel divinity feature, which they can use to turn undead, or they get an option from their divine domain. The PF2 cleric doesn't get this. They get that pool of healing or harm spells each day that they can use, but they don't get the specific, unique ability of channel divinity. Instead, turn undead becomes a 2nd level feat to the cleric, so they don't immediately get access to it like they would in 5e. They have the choice to get it. But if you are not a cleric that finds yourself fighting a lot of undead or using turn undead, or even your channel divinity power a whole heap, you do get choice for what you want that power to be in the Pathfinder cleric. And that's really the biggest difference between these 2 versions of the classes from this point forward. Once you've gotten over your initial proficiencies, it's choice points all along the character creation path. So 5e clerics get about 6 choice points throughout their lifetime as a cleric outside of their ancestry and their initial class choice. They get their divine domain, and then they get the 5 ability score increases where they get to choose whether they want to use a feat if the GM allows feats in the game. Compared to that, Pathfinder 2nd edition clerics get about 30 choice points over the course of their adventuring career between their cleric feats, their general feats, skill feats, ancestry feats, and then their doctrine as well. What this means is clerics in PF2 have a greater scope to be different from one another than in 5e. In 5th edition, 2 life domain clerics are going to look very similar outside of their spell choices. Whereas in PF2, you could have 2 clerics with the same doctrine, but they could choose radically different feats all throughout their adventuring career and end up doing quite different things on the battlefield. An interesting thing I thought it was worth noting, though, when it comes to the way the cleric specifically interacts with the system, is when it comes to being like a frontline fighting cleric, a battle cleric. I think that a lot of people, when they think of the cleric, that is one of the roles that they want them to fill. They want to be on the front line, not necessarily the highest damage dealer, but you want to be there in the thick of things. And the PF2 system does make that a little bit easier in the way that spellcasting and holding items and shields works. So in 5th edition, to be able to cast a spell, you have to have a free hand, or your hand has to be holding a divine focus or a spellcasting focus. If you want to get around that, you have to take the Warcaster feat. The Warcaster feat allows you to perform the semantic components of spells, even when you have weapons or a shield in one or both hands. This is a feat, so you need to be able to either take a 1st level feat, which means that you're going to either be looking to homebrew it and allow feats at 1st level, or taking a variant human, or you're waiting until 4th level to pick this feat up. In Pathfinder 2e, though, somatic components work a little bit differently. You can use this component while holding something in your hand, but not if you are restrained or otherwise unable to gesture freely. What this means is if you're a cleric in PF2 and you want to cast a spell that uses somatic and verbal components, but not material components, you can do that whilst using a shield and a weapon. This means you can get the benefits of the raise a shield action to increase your AC each round, and you can also use the shield block reaction, which will allow you to reduce some of that incoming damage, making your cleric a lot more survivable. And then when you check out the divine 1st level spells especially, most of them are somatic and verbal and don't require material components. Most of the spells you're going to be casting, you will be able to cast while holding your weapon and your shield. So that's a look at the cleric between the two systems. I'd love to know what you think about them down in the comments below. And if you're new to Pathfinder, check out this getting started video that goes over everything that you need to know to dive into this system. But until next time, happy gaming.